Hello and welcome to my channel. This one is going to be a landscape in pastel, and I'm going to be working on the UART sanded paper. It's a slightly unusual format. It's about 12 inches in length and about only 4 inches in height. So the paper, like I said, is the UART sanded paper. It's UART 800. The grade of the paper is 800. I like the paper to be a little bit on the smoother side. First I did a quick sketch with pencils, and now I'm going to start working with pastels. Now as for the brand of the pastels, I'm using whatever I have, so don't really bother asking me what they are and where I get them. I use whatever I have. I have some Master's Touch. This is a woodless Master's Touch pastel pencil. I also have some Quantis, some Kohinoors, whatever I have lying around. Some of them I bought myself, others were bought to me as a present. Whatever. You can use any brand, you can use any pastel pencils or soft pastels. So for the sky, I put down a little bit of this light blue color, which is something like a sky blue or a very light ultramarine, and then I started putting a little bit of white on top. You can see that I left out a bit of space for the really bright parts of the clouds. I may throw in a little bit of other blue colors in order to get some kind of more realistic bluish color of the sky, like for example a little bit of this light blue. Don't really know what this is. This is something like a light phthalo blue or a very light phthalo blue, but this is a Kohinoor soft pastel that I'm throwing in now. I'm just going to add a touch of that and then mix these two together to get hopefully a nice color of the sky. And of course I'm going to blend that with my finger. Now I haven't worked on this paper for a while now. I haven't used UART in months. I do like UART 800. I do like that paper and I have lots of it. But I find that it doesn't work that great with colored pencils. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Let me just explain what I'm doing here. So I'm starting to draw some of the brighter parts of the clouds using a white pastel, and I'm going to blend that in and refine the edges and the smaller shapes a little bit later. So what was I talking about? I said that I don't really like the fact that when you use colored pencils on this paper, it can be a little bit difficult to overcome the background color of the paper and the texture that the paper creates. Pastels, on the other hand, work much better, well, work quite a bit better than colored pencils on this surface. This surface is a pleasure to work with when you're using pastels and pastel pencils. So now that I decided to use pastels after a long time, I am going to use some UART sanded paper. Some people also like Pastel Matte, Sennelier, and some others. This is the one that I have, so that's what I'm using. Anyway, I'm using this white pencil in order to draw some of the smaller shapes of clouds, and then here on the right side and at the bottom I'm going to draw the shadow side of this large group of clouds. I first used the same blue that I used for the sky, which is, as I've already described it, something like a light blue, a sky blue, or a very light ultramarine. And then on top of that and in between that, I added some lighter shapes of those clouds, smaller clouds or shapes of clouds, which are a little bit more exposed to the sunlight. So because clouds are three-dimensional objects, as I always say, Some parts of them are going to be more sunlit, some of them are going to be more exposed to the light source, others are going to be in the shadow, they're going to be a little bit darker. I threw in a little bit of slightly darker bluish color there, here and there as well, in order to increase that contrast. And now I think the sky is starting to look pretty good. I'm just going to add a few more shapes with a white pencil, and then I'll do a little bit of fixing in between the layers. So here I'm continuing the drawing process. I've already applied the fixative spray on the sky. The reason why I did that was because there's quite a few layers there, and I would have a lot of dust that's not fixed, that's kind of just lying on top of that paper, and that would perhaps cause a little bit of muddying of colors when I try to draw shapes in front of the sky. So what I plan to do is draw some trees, and I want the background to be fixed, or at least partially fixed. Anyway, for the ground here, for this hilltop, I used a little bit of brown and a bit of light beige. I didn't want it to be too dark. I wanted it to be of lighter color for the most part, but with a few darker shapes and darker areas here and there. I also needed to clean up the edge as best as I could, and then after that I started working on the trees. For the trees I decided to go with darker green, and I'm using a soft pastel here rather than a pastel pencil, because I don't really think I have such dark greens among my pastel pencils. Anyway, this Kohinoor dark green soft pastel will do, and I'm going to use it to draw some shapes of trees, and then of course I'm going to work on top of that with black in order to further define the texture, the appearance of the foliage, as well as the smaller shapes within that group of trees. Did a little bit of dabbing, a little bit of blending. You can see that one tree that is in the middle between the others is kind of in the shadow, so it's a little bit darker. There's going to be like a grassy area or a few grassy patches here and there, just to break up the monotony of that brownish dirt terrain. And then I'm gonna put in a little bit more work on the trees in order to make them look a bit more detailed. To do that, I'm going to use black color. Now, I use this approach pretty much every time I draw trees. When I work in pastel, I use a combination of whichever green I pick, a green and a black. When I work in colored pencil, I use a black colored pencil and a green colored pencil. And what I do with that is I use the black to create shadow areas on the canopies of trees, but also to create a texture on the green parts of the tree. And that texture looks like a combination of tiny green and dark green or black shapes, which hopefully ends up looking like foliage. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. But in addition to that texture that looks like foliage, I also concentrate a little bit more of that black color or that dark color in certain areas in order to break up the canopies into smaller segments, so that the canopies themselves would look three-dimensional, and also so that I would define the shapes of individual trees, because we have a group of trees here. And in addition to these larger trees, we're also going to have a few smaller trees and bushes in front of them here and there, scattered all over that hilltop. And they're going to be casting a little bit of shadow under them, like so. The shadow is very important because you want to integrate those trees into the terrain. You don't want to make it look like they're just hovering there. So the shadow is what makes them look realistic, and what also additionally shows us the direction of the light source. You can see that here and there I'm throwing in a little bit of this yellowish green. This is like a mid-tone green, a little bit lighter than this dark green. And the pencil that I used there was the Conte a Paris yellowish green pencil. So I have a number of different brands. And also another thing, for the black shapes, for the darker shapes, I will often use a charcoal pencil in addition to the black pastel, because the woodless charcoal pencils can often be easier to sharpen than charcoal pencils. So I will use whatever I have at my disposal, rather than just limiting myself to just one brand. Normally I just buy whatever I can find locally, or whatever people give me as a present. And when I say people, I mean my sister, because that's who usually buys art supplies for me. Anyway, here I'm going to draw some smaller shapes of trees and bushes. We have like a small shape of a tree there on the horizon against the clouds. I think that's a nice touch because it creates contrast with the cloud, but it also gives you a suggestion of distance, because you see a smaller object much further away. So that's another thing that you can do to create depth in your scene. Here I'm trying to produce a little bit of illusion of detail on this area, brownish area here, by using some lighter and darker shapes. Nothing too fancy. I'm just sort of dragging my pencil here and there just to create a little bit of texture, and that texture is usually what creates that illusion of detail. Here we're going to have some more bushes and another small group of trees, and then I'm going to do the mountain on the right side. I'm going to use the same approach here, a little bit of that dark green soft pastel, and then a little bit of black on top of that to create slightly more interesting shapes with a little bit more texture. And you can see you can produce a fairly realistic looking scene with very little effort. You can draw something like this in under an hour, I think, very easily. But the biggest trick here, I think, is how to combine the black and the green to imitate the appearance of foliage, which isn't really that complicated in my opinion. Here I'm going to draw a slightly more distant mountain here, because it's kind of bluish. I'm not going to keep it like that. I'm going to modify this blue a little bit because it looks a little bit weird. So I tried throwing in a little bit of this warmer blue, but it's not dark enough, and I also want it to be a little bit more greenish. So I'm going to throw in a little bit of this dark green and mix that with this ultramarine blue to get something that looks like a bluish shape of a distant mountain. I'm basically trying to imitate the atmospheric effect by making the mountains which are further back a little bit less defined and also a bit more bluish. I'm going to add a few details here and there just to create a little bit of variation on that mountain, but nothing too fancy because, like I said, it is far away, so it's going to be less defined. Anyway, what I also have to do is just finish the rest of the terrain here in the middle, and then draw a few more trees which are going to push that mountain on the right back, and I'm going to make it clear to the viewer that these trees are a part of the foreground and that the mountains in the back are way back there, much further away. So that's basically the idea. That's what I'm trying to suggest to the viewer. Anyway, I'm using that dark green soft pastel again, and I'm just playing around with the soft pastel, trying to create some smaller shapes. You can see that I'm not trying to fill in the whole thing. I'm going to leave some spaces where you can see through the canopy of the tree. I wanted to, I don't want the canopy of the tree to obscure the background entirely. I wanted to show a little bit of light through the canopy, either the light of the sky or that background. Maybe we can see a little bit of the mountain through the canopy, whatever. But I'm also going to include these shadows under the trees because, like I said, those are very important in order to make the trees look realistic. So once I have the darker greens in place, I'm using the black to draw the smaller shapes. And the way that I do this is just by dragging the pencil and going back and forth and in a circular motion, creating tiny shapes, a tiny subtle texture that kind of looks like a combination of a bunch of small lighter and darker shapes, which is ultimately what foliage looks like as seen from a distance. And once I do that, I then focus on certain areas a little bit more than others, and I put in a bit more of the black, creating really dark green areas, because I want those areas to be the darker shadow areas, especially at the bottom of the tree, but also here and there in the middle of the canopy of the tree, maybe to make it look like some parts of that canopy are a little bit further away from the light source and therefore darker. So UART 800, that's the paper I'm using. It's a sanded paper which allows you to put in a few layers. On regular paper you wouldn't really be able to do that with pastel, obviously. I'm going to add something like that kind of looks like a path here in the middle, so something like a lighter shape there, just to make the foreground a little bit more interesting, I suppose. And then I'm going to finish the scene by removing the tape from these corners and finishing the whatever needs to be done on the rest of the paper. Like I said, this only works on, or this works much better on sanded paper than it does on regular paper. Here is my signature over there on the left, and now the drawing is done. I hope you like this scene. I hope you like the way it turned out. Don't forget to check out my other videos, my other landscapes. If you want to see a lot more content and longer videos, full-length videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.